Norman. I think it's always interesting to me to know what I might say also, so that's good. You should have a handout, since I'm not modern enough to put this on to a slideshow. And this way you can take it home, and this way you can sleep through the talk. So, so the first page is a bibliography, and most of them I have references to in the pages attached, and I leave it to you to figure out which ones are not referenced. You'll notice that they're taken from a lot of different places, including some scientific things as well as Theosophical, as well as Buddhist. And I've tried to take most of the ideas from the intergroup teachings and from volume 12 of the Esoteric teachings, which may be published again. So the title is intriguing, and I must say at the outset, there's no way to beat the cycles, and there's no way to escape Nirvana. That was just to get you in here. I'll worry about that next life. So, first of all, let's look at the situation we find ourselves in. In this, we're in the fourth round of the Earth chain, and we have several categories of people that we find in the world, and the vast majority of us are, of course, fourth rounders. There are those that Blavatsky says they call fifth rounders, and she says it is all such prematurely developed intellects on this on the spiritual plane in our race are abnormal. They are those we call the fifth rounders. Now notice they are here, so they're only abnormal. There are at least one sixth rounder, and that's the Buddha. So in the fifth round, we will all be masters, and in the sixth round, we'll all be Buddhas, if we make it. So there are three categories of monads that exist in our world as well, and those that have reached the human kingdom in the first three rounds. The rest of us reached the human kingdom in the first, by the third 3.5 round period. And some of those were in the human kingdom on the lunar chain. Some of them were in the animal kingdom in the lunar chain. And they have attained the human condition before the middle of the third round. And then there are those that have not yet attained the human kingdom, which I suppose is everything else. The animals, plants, minerals. All the monads in the monadic streams in our world. So, of what are we composed? I think a lot of our confusion comes in thinking that we are a single being in a body and various different principles, but we're really, Blavatsky keeps pounding into us, we're a composite being. Our monad didn't have a body, didn't have any lower mind, and didn't have any higher mind. It's a monad of consciousness, gradually connecting and building more monads around it as it builds its vehicles. So where did we get these vehicles? We call the entities that gave us our vehicles Pitris, or fathers. The Lunar Pitris gave us our physical form, so this physical form we're walking around in is the lunar body that Blavatsky says in The Voice of the Silence, we should slay the lunar body or get out of it, right? We really can't do anything while we're caught in this state of lunacy. So the lunar Pitris, we're told, were beings that completed their human stage on the moon chain, the previous chain to the earth. They went through and developed all the 49 fires, and as Blavatsky says, they graduated from the human kingdom. But the lunar chain is on a more physical plane than, or a series of planes in the earth chain. So we right now in our physical plane is really the astral plane of the moon. The physical body of the moon has already decayed and gone. Excuse me. What we see in the sky is really the astral body of the moon. And because of that situation, although the lunar Pitris graduated from the human kingdom, they were still not on a high enough plane spiritually to exist, to operate fully in the Dhyani Chohanic kingdom. They still had a very strong connection to those monads in the second category, those that were in the human kingdom in the moon chain, and those that were still in the animal kingdom in the moon chain. And because of this strong connection, they were only enabled to exude their shadows, their chayas, and those are the forms that our monad stepped into and used as a vehicle, and still do today. So bear that in mind. If we go through all of the 7 rounds on this earth chain, we will be lunar Pitris for the next chain. Still not Dhyani Chohanic entities, because each chain is on a successively higher spiritual plane. Now the other parties that formed our consciousness were, if we had been just that, we would now have our physical form. The lunar Pitris, after they exuded this form, are said to have gone to the Mahar Loka. The Mahar Loka is the 5th plane of the objective physical plane. Still not off the objective plane. And there they reside, we assume, through the rest of the Manvantara. And since there is no separateness, they are our lower mind. Remember, we're a composite being made up of them, as well as the other Pitris, the solar Pitris. Now, there is some discussion in Theosophical literature that our higher mind came from Venus. I don't know if you've read those opinions. And that cannot be, because Blavatsky says the Agnishvata Pitris came from more spiritual realms and previous Manvantaras, not from the lunar chain. So they had already progressed to the point where they had all of the 49 fires developed, and they had their eternal life already in hand. They were able to give us our higher mind. In a sense, they are our higher mind. You'll find all of this in my notes. You can only give out what you have evolved. However, we do have all of their principles latent in us at this time. The question is, of course, how do we develop those? And that's, of course, what I'm talking about. So now I want to change the subject just slightly, and let's look at the time periods. There was an interesting article published in 1958 in the Theosophist. It was published, a publication of notes that was found in Blavatsky's effects that had not been published. And it was notes on the cycles, the races, the rounds, the time periods, and how to calculate those. Jeffrey Barborka, one of the students of GDP, made an analysis of those papers and published it in chapter 16 of a book called Peopling the Earth, which is his commentary on cosmogenesis of the secret doctrine. So rather than go through all of these time periods, we'll just look at it quickly. You can review all of this in chapter 16. It's worthwhile doing. I do have a few issues with it, but I'm not going to bring those up today. There was a reference in Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, page 69, where Blavatsky gave the number 18,618,000 years and 728 years from the time of the Vaivasvata Manu, which is the human period, until 1875. That's rather precise. That's given from Ashura Maya's notes, we're told. Ashura Maya was the main or the biggest, most known astronomer in Atlantis in the Brahmanic records. So relying on that number, we can say up till 2012 there are 18,618,953 years that we have been in the human kingdom with that Vaivasvata Manu period. Well, the fifth race, I give on page 5 of the notes the duration of the racial periods. This is all globe D of the fourth round. So to the end of the fifth race, to make it short, we still have 4,337,434 years to go. Plus we have another nearly 9.5 million years in the sixth race and another 11 million years in the seventh race just to finish the fourth round. Are you getting tired yet? So we have a total of 24.8 million years remaining in the fourth round, just the fourth round. We still have fifth, sixth, and seventh to go. Right? If we take the rule of thumb that there's 1,500 years between our incarnations, now this is of course just a rule of thumb, that could be longer or shorter, depending on the nature of your Kamaloka and your Devachanic period. But we'll just use it for calculation purposes. And if you divide that 18 million years by 1,500 years, you find we have 16,536 lifetimes to go just to finish the fourth round. Right? Well, the Buddha must have seen this. So not only did he go out and find all the suffering and death and disease and our old age, and he said, wow, 16,000, and remember that was 2,500 years ago. So there was a couple more lifetimes besides these 16,000. There must be some solution to this. So he gave us two solutions. One we'll call the exoteric solution, and another one the esoteric solution. The exoteric solution we find in Theravada Buddhism, although like Nicholas said, it's not exclusive to Theravada Buddhism, nor is the Mahayana path exclusive to the Mahayana. They are merely mixed. Theravada merely emphasizes the exoteric path and says, look, this is terrible. We have 16,500 more years of this, or lifetimes of this. Talk about years, that's another 100 times. Right? The solution is, of course, get out of here. Right? Stop it. Get off the wheel. And he gives methods to do that. He gives methods of basically meditation and the paramitas. There's a reference in here, if I can find in my notes. This comes from a book called Heart of Buddhist Meditation by Nyanaponika Thera. He did some rather significant writings in Theravada Buddhism. He's from the Burmese school and stayed in the monasteries in Sri Lanka for over 50 years, so he should be really Nyanaponika Mahathera. But he was so well known, he just kept the name Thera instead on the end. And he wrote that the necessary things is way down the bottom of page 6, to acquire, maintain, and develop in the midst of life's vicissitudes those high virtues, the perfections, or the paramis, which we call the paramitas, which are requisite conditions of Buddhahood. Insight through the only way for fully developed satipatthana. Satipatthana is right mindfulness, based on 4 foundations of mindfulness, where you analyze all of your emotional, mental, sensory, and mind content interactions to the point where you can drop them and step away from all of the associations and basically empty most of the tonic elementals that drag you back into incarnation. The paramitas is a way of purifying yourself so that you can do that. That path will lead you by getting you into dharana, which is concentration, and into dhyana, which is beyond that basic concentration, into what Ken was talking about, and lead you into samadhi in this lifetime, in this very lifetime. You don't need to go anymore. You don't need to do any more than one life. Go to a Theravada monastery, practice these arts, and withdraw into nirvana when you die. Now, this concept of nirvana, as Blavatsky says, this is the selfish path. This is the pratimoksha, which is the pratyeka jnana, which makes the pratyeka Buddha. That Blavatsky said in The Voices of Silence is really a selfish path. There are some early versions of The Voice of the Silence where that was taken out and modified. I don't believe anybody still publishes that version anymore. There are, though, 25 different versions of the Voice of the Silence in the world now. So I'd say go back to the original. And there are a few errors in it, but you can piece those together and stick to the original version. But you can go to nirvana immediately, step outside, and she says you no longer have any connection with anything going on in this world. You are in a bliss state all by yourself. But it's really not a self, so you won't go totally insane. You'll just be in bliss until the next manvantara. Now, the next manvantara, we must assume you have not completed the 49 fires that are necessary for evolution. So where you come out, I really am not privy to the information, but I would assume it's back into the human kingdom, where you can do this again and again, and just stay forever in nirvana. Well, that's the exoteric path. Right? He also gave an esoteric way of solving this problem, and that's the bodhisattva path. Well, you don't really solve the problem. You move to a different level of consciousness, and we'll get into that in detail. But the first stages of it is precisely the same. You do meditation. Blavatsky says you have to have concentration developed or you can't do anything else in occultism. It is the first primary step, and you have to have it very well developed before you can go ahead in any other practice. I'm trying to cut this down as I go. The paramitas are emphasized in the Mahayana Buddhism. The voice of the silence brings them out, which is, the voice of the silence is probably the primary Raja Yoga text. The only other one I think that's reliable is the Crest Jewel of Wisdom, and it's not as clearly laid out as the voice of the silence. Now there's a distinction that needs to be drawn. How do we now solve the cycles, beat the cycles, and really avoid nirvana? Avoid this state of nirvana where you're no longer in contact with with our world. Nirvana is not a place; it's a state of being. Theravada Buddhism talks about getting out of nirvana, going to nirvana, and the Mahayana talks very little about nirvana whatsoever. You don't find it discussed in the literature, you don't find any warnings, don't go to nirvana. You don't find any warnings, rush and go to nirvana. Because as you start expanding your consciousness, nirvana moves further and further away. Into a higher and higher level, because it's only a place where you are in a state of really unconsciousness. I guess that's okay. Can I call it that, Ken? It's really a state where you're in the real and everything is utter reality. So it's really a state of pure consciousness with no accidental relationships. So before we go on into how to really solve the problem, let's look at what goes on in in a normal, everyday person's life and death process. Excuse me. Blavatsky says, again in Secret Doctrine 167, that it's not part of the evolutionary law. She says that man should develop all of his fifth principle, manas, before the completion of the fifth round. And yet, in order to become an adept, you have to make yourself one with manas. So it's not in the part of the evolutionary law, but it's not impossible, because all of these things reside within us, gifts, I guess we can call it gifts of the solar Pitris. It's not also in the natural order of things that we should become a perfect septenary being before the end of the seventh race. Yet, she says, we have all these principles latent within us from birth. So obviously, it's possible. So there is a way to beat the cycles, huh? Can't get rid of nirvana. So normally, when we die, we drop into a state of unconsciousness. I won't go through the detail. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. Everybody knows. Part of you go to the kama loka, and the second death, your higher consciousness goes into a dream state called devachan. Now it's not deva loka, it's devachan. It's another mental condition. You leave your kama rupa in the kama loka, and it drops away, and you have a long period in the devachan, long or short, depending on the nature of your aspirations or lack of them, Blavatsky says, or Deep Ruker says. It's hard for me to keep track who's who there. So in the devachan, you are in a very deep dream state with all your higher consciousness fulfilling all of your dreams of high ethical parts in your world, and your higher spiritual consciousness is embodying on each of the globes on the ascending chain of the earth chain, and you're just kind of riding along what GDP calls a passenger in a train, going through various stations in the night while you're asleep, and you might wake up a little bit here and there, gain a little higher consciousness, but mostly it's just a dream. And then the spiritual monad goes on out into the outer rounds and embodies in each of the seven sacred planets, goes through those chains, on up into the solar chain, goes through the seven solar, which may be 10 or 12, remember, but into the seven suns, and back down into the planetary seven sacred planets, back through those chains, and back down to the earth chain. By the time it reaches the earth chain, comes back to globe A, at the same time, the sleeping monad in this train is starting to wake up and have memories in the fine material spheres as it comes into globe A, ever more down into more material sphere, globe B, until it reaches globe C, picks up all those tonic elementals that you've left behind uncleared, and reincarnates into globe D, Earth, essentially the same being that left. Right? Now you're going to have a new persona. You may be, obviously, this is 1,500 years later, it's going to be a different culture, a different place, so you're not going to be the same person, thankfully, right? But you'll be essentially the same intentions. The skandhas are there, or the tonic elementals are there waiting for you. And that will continue so long as you're sleeping on that train. If you could expand your consciousness to the point where your Devachanic interlude is raised to a higher state, like the Nirvana can be raised to a higher state, then perhaps you'll be aware on globe E, globe F, and globe G, to the point where the Devachan is not there. You won't be in the what we think of as a dream state in the Devachan. You'll be going around the rounds consciously. Through the purification process of the paramitas and the other meditation processes, then you should be able to clear out these tonic elementals and not have them drawing you back into incarnation. At that point, you come in through choice, Blavatsky says. The references are in the notes. And basically, you will have completed the round without these 15,000 lifetimes. So now let's look at how that might be done. This we can call the esoteric accelerated path, right, of the Amrita Yana. And then, of course, there's an occult path. There's a couple notes I want to bring your attention to on 9. Wherever you see these little black rectangles on the paper, that was a moment of mindlessness when I took this to the printer and neglected to tell them there's color. This should have been printed in color. So wherever you see that blackout, that says heart. In every case. Yes, if you look really closely, if you have higher vision, you can see this. So on the bottom of 9 in footnote D2, where you'll see this, if they choose for the sake of doing good to the world, they may incarnate on earth. She's talking about after reaching moksha, after reaching this state, you do have the choice of coming back in. It doesn't seem to be, this is basically whether you go to Nirvana or not, right? So there is a choice. It's discussed in the Mahatma letters as well. But Deeparuka says something that's quite interesting on in volume 12, page 43, down at the bottom of 9, it starts, the consciousness attained by intense training in our own Oriental school, after following which one becomes a nirvani, is the consciousness of the 6th round, and a late period during that 6th round too. So through this training, you can become a Buddha, right? Well, whatever that means. You'll have the Buddhic consciousness developed. Doesn't seem you have to wait around. He says this is just intense training, right? So Blavatsky agrees meditation is the first step. You must reach dharana before you can do anything else. And then the next step is, in the voice of the silence, is thou art now in dharana. The star which is thy goal is what men call dhyana. This is Voice of the Silence 1, 19 through 20. And there's a footnote that says dhyana is the last stage before the final one, the final on this earth, unless one becomes a full Mahatma. Now the Mahatmans were this first stream of beings who were human in the first group of monads that were human on the first 3 rounds, and when the Lunar Pitris came in, they enlightened those beings and made the sages and seers, the Mahatmas. So that's how they got here in 18 million years ago, 15 million years ago. I'll leave that up for further research. They've been around a while, right? Maybe 400 years in each body, according to a note that M says in the Mahatma letters. So the first essential step is meditation. The second one is really in the purification, getting rid of the impressions, especially those kama impressions. In intergroup teaching, she says we should be careful of the impressions we make on the body, especially as to the impressions in which kama takes part. Right? Those trishnas and tanhas that drag us back down into this physical incarnation, we want to clear those out. Purification. There are some interesting things coming out now in modern literature that corroborate all these things. I think it's rather interesting. Most of these writings are still esoteric in the Theosophical writings and in the world knowledge, and yet it's coming out in some of the scientific writings. Probably due to the work of Heart Math that you heard last year, and they have a book called Science of Heart. You can get it, you can download it as an iBook free, or you can buy it from them. And they are coming to the same conclusion that the heart is the center of what you need to develop. There's another book called Biology of Transcendence, which talks about what happens to your body in this transcendence process. There's another one called The Mindful Brain that talks about what goes on physiologically in your brain when you're doing mindfulness. both loving kindness meditation or heart chakra meditation and mindfulness actually change the structure, the neurological structure of your brain and your heart. Right? Physiologically discovered now. Although Blavatsky said this clearly back in 1889 or 1890, 1891. In Esoteric Teachings, Volume 1, GDP says the lower self must be wiped out, which means withdrawn upwards or inwards and absorbed by the higher self. Picturesque. Guru Mai, who was the successor to Muktananda, says the language of the heart is silence. Silence, the inner dialogue, says Don Juan de Castaneda. Stop, wipe out all memory of the past, said Blavatsky in The Voice of the Silence, remember yesterday. Stop all of the inner chatter. And then in intergroup teachings on 173, here's the reference we were mentioning yesterday. Your best method is to concentrate on the Master as a living man within you. Make his image in your heart and a focus of concentration so as to lose all sense of bodily existence in the one thought. Well, this is not for the purpose of personality worship. This is the purpose of contacting the Mahatma. In some of the training that I went through in Native American traditions, you use visualization to contact your other parties, your higher cohorts, if you want. You visualize them and you make mental communication with them. So I think this is the intent, is to stay in communication. In our own organization, I didn't really care for the imagery of another being in my heart, although Buddhists use this all the time. Visualize the Buddha in and all around you so you can become Buddha. They don't do it as a personality worship either, but as a way of training that Buddhic splendor. What we do to get around this, we just image solar splendor originating from the heart, and you meditate on that glory of the heart glowing all about you in order to center your consciousness in the heart. So Blavatsky says, again, this is the same reference in Intergroup Teachings, the great difficulty to be overcome is the registration of the knowledge of the higher self on the physical plane. To accomplish this, the brain must be made an entire blank to all but the higher consciousness. Right? Stop all of the associative thinking, all the reminiscence. Just sit in that silence and connect to your higher consciousness. So on page 12, you'll notice there's a lot of black spots. I put these in because they're all references to heart, the central importance of the heart in this whole process. And again, it goes back to the secret doctrine. The first reference there, I won't read it all, but except the Agnishavata, these are the ones that bring in our higher mind. They're called the heart of the Dhyani Chohanic body. And that heart, she talks about being a hebdomatic essence of this angelic heart. That's sevenfold, the sevenfold heart, the angelic heart. And that of man is just a copy, a reflection, or a prototype of the one above. So your heart is indeed connected with the universal heart. Another Guru Mai, interesting enough, says there is essentially only one heart, a universal function expressing through each of us in infinitely varied yet similar ways. I think it's remarkable that this is coming out everywhere now. In a group teaching, Blavatsky says the heart corresponds with jiva, the same as universal deity. Jiva, remember, is just prana. Well, I should say that the other way around. Prana is just jiva. When jiva is encapsulated in your form, it's called prana. When it's out, we are all jivanus, right? Just little life atoms. That's all that exists from that aspect. Intergroup teaching again, she says the heart is the organ of spiritual consciousness. It corresponds to that universal deity. The effort should be continually made to center the consciousness in the heart and listen to the promptings of the spiritual consciousness. Because even though it might be far away, it has to be started, and that is the only way. Well, part of the only way. The Science of Heart, again, Heart Math book, says exactly the same point. Now we know there are neurological connections between the heart and the brain. This wasn't known too long ago. There are connections, hormonal connections. The heart has been found to produce hormones. It's really just another endocrine gland. In a sense, it produces hormones. It also produces an intense magnetic field, much stronger than the brain. That's probably why the stem cells, when they're in vitro rather than in vivo, don't develop right, because they're not in that magnetic field of the mother. Right? If they were probably put in that magnetic field, they would be entrained into the same intention, the same skandhas would be there, and you would draw your own life atoms into them. That's my guess, is that material science only thinks they're particles, little cells, and have no real life connection. So once they expand into a little deeper understanding, I think maybe we could transform somebody's cells into our own by putting it in our own magnetic field. So anyway, a thought. As we center our consciousness in the heart, we find that the afferent neurological connections to the brain increase. Those are the brain, the neurons that carry sensations from our heart to the brain actually increase. Blavatsky says a normal man, the heart is negative relative to the mind. And somehow if we could make the heart positive relative to the brain, then we would have no trouble bringing the higher consciousness down to the heart and register it in the brain. The quote's in here. And the heart math is showing, and biology of transcendence shows that we can increase those afferent neurological bonds from the heart to the brain by centering our consciousness in the heart rather than the mind. We've been taught that the brain runs everything, the heart runs everything. Not normally. The brain tends to try to run the heart in our regular everyday life. We can reverse that by moving into silence, by focusing our concentration in the heart, and allowing our higher consciousness to come down through our heart and actually regulate the brain. They do make a note in here that they found the brain sends out messages to the heart, sends messages to the brain, which the brain understands and obeys. Simple process, yes? Yeah, I've just gone through several of these references there. One other note I thought was interesting, maybe it's a little off subject, but on page 13, note Romans 7, intergroup teachings, page 187, it says, when the adept projects his mayavi rupa, the guiding intelligence that informs it comes from the heart. Again, the higher consciousness going into the Mayavi Rupa, you might think you're projecting this Mayavi Rupa somehow from your brain, when actually it's projected from your Atmic aura, and the brain or the guiding force that runs that image is from your heart, your higher consciousness. So when Blavatsky says, image this purple veil and grab it with a grip of death and form it into this body, your guidance comes from the heart. Again, cut off the brain. Right? Off with his head, right? So Deeparuker talks a lot about sleep and death being brothers. They're really the same process, sleep, death, initiation. They're all the same trains. You can only follow certain pathways through the cosmos. These consciousness, the monads run along certain passageways, and you are limited to those as well. So the New Age thought that you're going to incarnate on another planet is, of course, a weak reference to the esoteric teaching that yes, you're going to incarnate in another planet, but it's going to be in your after-death states as you go through the various globes and outer rounds. But death and sleep are the same thing. So Ken's asked if anybody could remember their dreams in deep sleep yesterday. And of course we can't, because our consciousness is centered in our brain. And at sleep, we're essentially dead. Okay, we have a little life going through us. But for all purposes, our lower self is dead, right? And the higher consciousness is active. Blavatsky said in her, and I didn't include that note here, but it's in her Blavatsky Lodge, the last book that came out on Blavatsky Lodge notes. She talked to her students and says, oh, you'd be really blessed because you have sleep at night and you go into unconsciousness. She says she has no rest because she's in her higher consciousness when she's asleep. So continual consciousness all the time. When your body is asleep, you're still awake and aware in your higher consciousness until you come back into your lower consciousness, just like death and re-embodiment, same pathway. So as you gain this connection with your higher consciousness, you gain awareness of your dreams at night, and even those deep sleep dreams, then your devachan is paripasu, going away as well. Because that's really the same thing. You go into dream state after death, you go into a dream state at sleep, and if you start getting rid of your unconscious digestion dreams and other sensory-oriented dreams through the purification process, you start moving into awareness in the devachanic period. Just through focusing on your heart and becoming one with the paramitas. Where you enter the devachan depends on where you are in consciousness. Depends what's going on, basically mind content of the Satipatthana. What's going on in your mind, that will lead you into a dream state somewhere through the devachanic period. It doesn't have to be E, F, it could be in G as you move up, and gradually move it out of those inner rounds until you're conscious on the inner rounds. Well, that's basically what goes on as you move into that state. The difference between the Nirvana of the Theravada and the Mahayana is Nirvana is here now. As GDP said, through this training you become a Nirvani. It doesn't mean you've died and gone to Nirvana. We even say you've gone to Nirvana. There is no Nirvana to go to. It's a state and a condition where you are in a state of in reality, and your consciousness resides in that which is real, that which does not change in the voice of the silence, right? out of body. But you do avoid the trap of going to Nirvana and becoming the Lunar Pitris in the following Manvantara. How long or what it takes to become the Solar Pitris, I would assume they're either on the Satyaloka of the objective plane, or indeed they are the heart of the Dhyana-Johanic kingdoms and have actually moved beyond the objective plane and are in the Dhyana-Johanic realms. I would assume that if you follow this path, you'll be able to discover the answer to that question. And I think I don't need to go into the difference between the inner and outer rounds. I think that's essentially all it is. And so by constantly moving your consciousness higher, you do indeed beat the rounds, and you do indeed beat and avoid going into nirvana. And as a final note, I'd like to read one by Esoteric Teachings. I didn't put which volume is here. I don't know which one it was, 38 to 39 page. It says, keep the processes of thought and one's consciousness constantly fluid, thus avoiding the danger of mental crystallization and the perilous self-satisfaction of feeling that there is not very much more to learn about it. For it is the one successful manner of putting the brain-mind in its proper place and making it a flexible and faithful servant instead of what it all too often is, a hard and rigid taskmaster. Thank you. Ray? Yeah.
Please, microphone first.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the talk. I learned a lot, and being exposed to these teachings. And one of the tendencies I have psychosomatically is I'm an engineer by trade, and I read science until I'm not fluid and I am a little mentally crystallized. Mm-hmm. Yet the information is so illuminating just to discover how reality works. I'm encouraged to continue reading. And one thing I read about that was the art of living. And one of the thoughts that is in the art, I'm a Lutheran. I grew up Lutheran, so Protestant. We don't usually go along with anybody. That's my Norwegian American tradition.
We all have our problems.
Like to learn it for ourselves, I guess. But the Martin Luther making his petition to God, and the first feedback I get from a local Buddhist temple is, well, that's fanatical. You have to be mindful. I said, oh boy. So I should throw away my past. But as I studied it further, if we have such a thing like a water body and all these bodies, if we are subjective, if we, in the Occident, accentuated our personality, whether it's Polish or whatever that is, and made our petition to God, would that not be the embrace or the art of living, so that when we went through our mindfulness and root cause analysis, we would find the greater precision that we were looking for, or something like this? So it seems like there is an art to being a person. We can't help it. So in these teachings, is that addressed somewhere so that we're allowed to be fluid and fun while we also learn this science and sort of thing?
Well, of course, I think you have to have fun all the time. If this isn't fun, you aren't going to do it. On the other hand, if you are all into fun, you aren't going to do it either. And you can have 15,600 more lives of fun. I think the only problem I see with what you're saying is putting it as an external being rather than an internal connection. Your higher consciousness is already one with, if you want, call it God, which to me is an infinity and therefore not a creator, since an infinity can't be a creator. But do you make yourself one with that higher consciousness? Of course, it's only relative to our plane, but your persona is only a mask that you're wearing, and if you choose to identify with it, then you are caught into this little trap of always having to have a new mask at every new life, and having to watch your mask fall apart in every life because it doesn't ever stay the same. So yes, you can go out and have fun. It would be rather silly not to, but the attachment and the strong attachment to having only fun makes you rather boring, right? I mean, boring in the sense that you're going to be doing this on and on and on, and sooner or later it will get tiresome. And there's higher fun. I had a person come in and lecture at a place that many years ago, and he gave a lecture at a Theosophical Society center that I was operating in Ocean Beach here. And he was a professor in college, and he talked about little Johnny coming in with his sad face on his look, and or look on his face. And he asked, "What's wrong?" And he says, "Oh, marble season, it's over, and there's just no reason to live anymore." You know? So he was talking about sex. How can you have, anything? And I said, well, sooner or later, there's going to be something better than marbles going along. And Blavatsky said she never really made love with anybody. She came close to it and wanted to, but she loved occultism more. So there's something higher to gain than the fun of the world when you get in touch with your higher consciousness. And you can't tell anybody that until they've made that connection. I think that's your answer.
Yeah, with that, thank you. And with that, yeah, but there's something, when I read these things, I want to liken it to call, you have science and you have these deities that create the minefield below, so we have something to evolve to. But then these deities also have to turn to their daily worship. So if you can imagine all these planes of behavior, we have to turn somewhere. So it's either the mystery that things will be better, or it's an end point where we want to arrive to. And so to detach successfully, Christians call it faith, and I think Buddhists call it detachment. So with that going, rather than to fall to the fun of the world or the things of the world, is to celebrate life, which is to sacrifice the lower nature for the higher. But to stay with that successfully, there must be a balance of activities that might be suggested by Blavatsky that kind of keep us in the momentum of making those breakthrough points or progress or something. I've not seen that.
Well, you have a very materialistic viewpoint of existence, and you're only seeing the physical plane. That's called delusion in the philosophy. The illusion is thinking what you're seeing is really here, and the delusion is thinking that's all that's here. We're talking about in these inner and outer rounds, you're out of the physical plane entirely. Time, duration are non-existent. I think if you're putting all of your marbles in one bag, so to speak, and keeping it on the physical plane, you're really limiting your evolutionary possibilities. You only have a short time to live, and you can spend it developing personality, and it's true, you have to have a personality or else you have nothing to give. So the first paramita is giving. And if you don't have it developed, what do you have to give? You have to have a consciousness that's high, that's powerful, that's strong, and compassionate. If it's selfish and self-oriented into just your own pleasure, then you're on the path to sorcery. And you'll be caught in the physical plane, which eventually will roll up and vanish. And these higher, what you're calling angelic beings, are not in the same situation where we are. They're not caught with a personality that they're going to be going through their daily life like we are. You're trying to put God in our own image, and that God cannot have any form. It cannot have anything related to your consciousness whatsoever, or it's an idol. I'd say study more and get into the inner teachings more deeply. You seem to have a mind that can cope with it. I'd look up with these intergroup teachings and get into the Theosophical studies and broaden it away from a materialistic vision.
Thank you, Joe. I enjoyed this very, very much, and I think I need to have some clarification because I don't think my thinking is correct in reference again to the Dion Shohans and the Lunar Pitris. My understanding was that when we finish the rounds that we go into the lower Dhyani Shohans, but I don't know if I'm thinking clearly after this. So I want you to clarify that.
You're thinking clearly, but you're thinking from exoteric writings by GDP and HPB. If you read Blavatsky's writings all the way from Isis Unveiled, all the way through the intergroup teachings, you'll find it's a different story from Isis to Secret Doctrine. It's a different story from Secret Doctrine into the esoteric teachings. And it's a different story yet again when you get into the intergroup teachings. GDP talked about it in the 12-volume series, that some things he took out of esoteric tradition and expanded and put in more. And he talked about it at the time that he couldn't say these things in exoteric work. It seems silly to us, you know, but some of these things that were esoteric 100 years ago are common knowledge now. And that will happen, I'm sure, with all the intergroup teachings as they get out and get known. They're going to be shown to be not quite right also. And it'll be something yet again. So I think you just have to, okay, take it. They went into the Dhyani Chohanic level, but they were still not high enough in the Dhyani Chohanic level in order to operate fully therein. So they're caught in an in-between state. The Maharloka is the 5th level and about the same place where a Raja Yoga begins, and even beyond the level of what a Hatha Yoga practitioner can get to. But they're still caught not quite on the Dhyani Chohanic planes. They've completed the human plane, and therefore they're able to give us our lower forms, but they weren't able to give us our higher minds because of their connection with those second group of monads that were human on the moon and become human now. So they're still connected with us. Dhyani Chohanic, not human anymore, but not quite well developed.
So they are Dhyani Shohanic, but my understanding was there was 3 different levels of Dhyani Shohanic.
Well, those are kingdoms, right?
Kingdoms, okay.
Kingdoms, and they're really the consciousness for the 3 elemental kingdoms. We had it on we had the screen up here yesterday where we had basically the form on one side and the consciousness on the other. So. The same idea. I mean, the elemental kingdom, what the forms, how can you have form without consciousness? The consciousness is the Dhyani Chohanic side. So globes E, F, and G is kind of the consciousness side to globes A, B, and C, which are those elemental kingdoms and Dhyani Chohanic kingdoms in consciousness.
So when we finish this mantra of the 7 rounds where we're at, the Lunar Pitris will go into a higher state of Dhyani Shohans.
I would assume so, but maybe that depends on what we do. I mean, when we think about it, a part I skipped in the talk, if we are really caught in our Devachanic period with a whole lot of tonic elementals, GDP's term, that are going to draw us back into incarnation, that basically shortens the time that the spiritual monad has to go through the outer rounds and back. If you have a very short Devachanic period, that other growth period is going to be shortened. So in essence, we are shortening the evolutionary period of our spiritual part, or our reincarnating, or our, I guess you can call it, there's so many different words given for it, but the higher part that's going through the outer rounds is going to be cut short, has to come back at the time that you're coming back out of Devachan.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
John, can I continue the discussion we started yesterday about the heart.
Sure.
We discovered a few thoughts, and I like to hear your comments on it. When you study the esoteric teachings of Blavatsky, she says one very important, to us very important thing: no occultist will concentrate on the body lower than the head. And she says everything lower than the head concentrated upon will be Hatha Yoga, and we refuse to do that because of all its dangers. And when you remind that, and last year in ITC and also here, this year, we hear much about the heart. All your black spots, there are many. And I think we have to really understand what the heart is. Yes. And when last autumn we heard about concentrating on the image of the master in the heart chakra, I thought they never read the esoteric teachings of Blavatsky, for the heart chakra is a part of the body. Yes. But we think we found a solution. And I don't mention it, will not mention it in my lecture in ITC, but we found out, and Henk helps me with that the embryo recapitulates all the forms of former lives. And the embryo starts in the 8th week with 3 derms. Is that an English term?
Yes.
The ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And the ectoderm is in fact the layer where all the organs, all the sacred planets within our bodily structure start. And in the dialogues, students of GDP asked him, why is the heart lower than the brains, while the heart is the king and the brain has to follow the leader? And then he says that it's only a temporary situation, that the heart started above the head and will return above the head. And it's not the localization I mean, but the hierarchical position. And when we are working for the future, I think when we say heart, we mustn't listen to heart math so much, but think about the fact that when the ectoderm starts to concrete the organs, the heart is upper, and then the brains, and then all the other organs. And it's only by the folding around of the ectoderm that the heart takes the place under the brains. But that is only on the physical level.
Right.
The 8th week repeats what we were in former days and what we will be in the 6th or 7th round. And when we keep that in our minds, then we talk about the heart in another way, also with all that lines between head and heart. They're not heart and head, they're heart and head. And if we look for a way to explain that to people in a way they immediately understand, then we beat heart math, you know. For they gave too much attention to our heart at the moment. But we have to prepare ourselves for the future. We have to forget our heart chakra. We have to live in those elements within ourselves we cannot place into the body. And then we follow another heart and another leader. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
yes.
that gives more depth to our theosophical work, I think.
Well, I think it's in essence true. I think you have to be careful thinking in an upper and a higher and lower brain, heart relative position in this body for sure. And you also have to be careful of what she might say in an exoteric work, early writings, and later, when the heart is really the kingly function, regardless of its position, it is higher than the brain, right? So I think it's true. You can't forget the heart because we're trying to forget the brain.
You know, if people say you have to live from your heart, it's not a theosophical gesture.
That's not what they're talking
No.
about, and that's not what I'm talking about. What are they? What you need to do is silence the brain and make it subordinate to the heart. The heart is, maybe it's in the position it's in right now, because as she says, in normal people's behavior, the heart is negative to the brain.
Yes.
And I think as we evolve, that heart will be at a higher place, or the brain will recede, because the brain's only needed in this 4th round. I think it isn't going to be needed as much in the 5th round, because we'll have a different physiology, I'm sure, by then. So I don't think you want to try and push yourself into a different physiology too fast. Definitely the heart is our connection with our higher consciousness, and just image your heart above. You know, maybe if you go to the Huna teachings, they have 3 chakras that are above the head, and that's where the higher consciousness is, and they focus their attention there.
What I try to explain, but perhaps not clearly enough, is just forget all chakras.
Oh, well, all the
Yes.
chakras are in the head, Blavatsky says. Remember, they're not down the spine. Those are only neural plexi. So you really want to get into the ventricles of the brain where the real chakras are. And you only want to use the 7 higher chakras, not the 7 lower chakras, she says. So ignore the lower 3, use 3 other higher that aren't mentioned anywhere, and head up, right? All the chakras are in the head, but that doesn't negate what she's saying as the heart being the image of the angelic heart. So I don't know how you resolve that, except that we are evolved right now with our heart lower than our brain.
No. Our heart still is higher.
Lower physically, I mean.
Yes, but the physical heart we have to forget.
I understand.
But I think Ken wants to add to it.
Just there's an extremely important footnote in The Voice of the Silence, which I won't even quote, just if anyone's interested. I think it's a very deep, very complex subject. And anyway, there's one in The Voice of the Silence regarding the rising of the Buddhic principle in relationship to the heart. Just a reference. In The Voice of the Silence, there's a footnote that relates the rising of higher consciousness, the heart, and the Buddhic principle.
Yes. Yeah.
So it would be a whole lecture. So I won't go further than that.
That's right. And it's in the Kabbalah, it's Tefereth, the heart in the center of the lower planes. I don't know how you resolve it being below the brain, except that it's, like you said, a physiological accident because of where we are in our growth.
I think when we try to elevate ourselves, to prepare ourselves to do our compassionate work,
We have to forget our physical body at all.
Oh, okay. I'll go along with that.
Don't look at your physical body. Look at your character development.
No argument.
Okay.
Am I really?
I just have a couple comments. One was in relationship to what Richard was talking about, and I find it very useful. And if you want to go to the Voice of the development of the robes corresponds to me to the Dhyan Chohanic. They're not separate. Whenever we start taking these hierarchies and we make them separate, Blavatsky says we are a host. Humanity is a host that embodies the entire cosmos. So when we start separating hierarchies, we get very linear. So, and she says there's failures in those realms. That's us. We're not awake. But I also want to comment that I've never heard that that's a wonderful way to put it. What she was talking about, the embryo and the ectoderm, because for, I don't know, 20 years, I've been kind of contemplating on how this turns inside out, because that which was within becomes without. And that's one of the most profound parts, is the human and the cosmic correspondences in the teachings. And they can be, you know, that, because you know what, they're not linear. They move, and you can't localize them. And I think that's why she gave it to us that way. So anyway, I appreciate that.
Just one short comment. I don't have the reference at hand, but it's just very interesting. I think the research was done at UCSD. I don't know if this is in HeartMath. I'm not familiar with HeartMath, but someone did a study because they wanted to see if the pulses in the body, how they synchronized with the heart, because it's very important to understand that physiology in cardiovascular problems. And quite amazingly, of course, and I think theosophically, is that the pulses are not connected to the heart. Each one has the pulse rate. They pulse the same, but they are not dependent on the heart pulse making them pulse. So that entire quality of the pulsation pervades our whole body without the cause being the physical pumping of the heart. They don't quite understand it yet. I'm not sure how this relates to this subject, so don't ask me that.
This is on. Yeah, I have a comment on that, Ken. So first, you're saying that when the heart pumps, that it doesn't also go at the same rhythm as the pulse on the wrist?
Yes, they're the same, but it's not causal. Pulses are maintaining the same rate without it being created by the mechanical movement of the heart.
Mechanical movement doesn't cause the pulse in the wrist?
No. That's new. It's very unusual. It's a purely electromagnetic, some kind of electromagnetic synchrony going on.
Okay, well, I'll have to think that one over a little bit. But in addition to that, I would comment that in traditional Chinese medicine and in Tibetan medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, the pulses are taken in reference to the 12 channels, especially in traditional Chinese medicine. And they have, again, a definite, each one is different for each person. So I will throw that in the equation for what it's worth. And it is diagnostic to tell which channels are having more or less problems.
Well, okay. I think we get a lot of answers from John, but we generate also some questions again. So we have to think over it a certain period. I propose nu een small break, so we can do the setup for the next talk. You can.
you.